Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We am very honored this afternoon to facilitate a panel where we're going to discuss about the future of the energy system, and particularly how to engage consumer and develop a new interface into the energy system with the consumer to be able to further educate and provide guarantee on the origin of the energy, but as well as the grid, and discuss how we need to develop grids and implement solutions which will ensure a resilient grid in the future. So I have a very distinguished list of participants to the panel, and we are going to immediately jump into the main two questions of our panel. So we really want to have our discussion around basically how to facilitate the introduction of low carbon energy into the system and how to further guarantee this clean electricity to the system 24/7. So I'm going now to ask this question to each of the panelists, starting maybe from the IEA and Pablo. What's your view into this particular topic? And maybe you can introduce yourself by a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Pablo Iracoch, and I'm part of the Renewables Integration and Secure Electricity Unit at the International Energy Agency, where basically we are at the heart of the global dialogue on energy, providing authoritative analysis data and policy recommendations, trying to provide secure and sustainable energy for all. In terms of the question of how to guarantee this 24/7 carbon-free energy, I think that the first aspect is to define what does 24/7 carbon-free energy means. And the way I like to think about it is that it means actually 31,536,000 seconds of carbon-free energy every year. And as we move towards net zero emissions, it is so important that we move away from yearly counting or average towards ensuring that demand is at every instant covered by carbon-free energy. In second place, as more consumers demand clean energy, governments and policymakers around the world need to ensure that sufficient clean energy supply is available. As you can see in our pathway to the net zero by 2050, we need to triple renewable energy generation by 2030 and increase it 8 times when we reach 2050. And in this manner, it's going to be essential to have a diversified system. Different technologies that are able to complement each other due to their different operational profiles are going to be able to increase our access to the resources that are viable. At the same time, we need to ensure that the increased geographical diversification allows us to address this variability by having bigger and better connected systems. Thirdly, there's the demand side aspect. It is so important to design market frameworks that provide the right incentives to facilitate the participation of demand side response, where consumers will change completely the way they access energy, and they will have to modify their patterns based on the status of the system. And this can go all the way from data centers that change the load of their operations based on the carbon intensity of the system, to electric vehicles charging smartly and responding to the conditions of the general and local grid. And the thing that brings the 3 points together is the need for flexibility. And this is the aspect that I think will remain at the heart of the discussion for the coming years. It is essential for policymakers and regulators to ensure that the future development of the world's power systems provide us with this flexibility. And that means that we need to utilize all sources of flexibility, including storage, demand-side response, different kind of low carbon and renewable technologies. Today, some of the consumers we've seen are moving towards 24/7 procurement of carbon-free energy. And I think that policymakers need to facilitate these endeavors, because even though in the future everybody should move towards that direction, these kind of enterprises would allow us to bring the first push, to bring the first movement. And that means that frameworks that allow us to create partnerships and mechanisms between governments and big consumers for this procurement can really support the access from consumers to completely carbon-free energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. So if I summarize, a very clear advocacy for moving into this direction on 24/7 and establishing a proper framework around it for enabling demand response flexibility and so on. Now I'm going to move maybe to the other side of the ocean with EPRI and all the research which EPRI is doing into that space. So maybe Cathy, what's your view on that particular aspect?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you to the EU for inviting me. Just a few words about EPRI before I get into the answers. I just want to say that I'm so excited to be here, and EPRI is an independent nonprofit organization conducting research and development to advance generation, delivery, and use of electricity for the benefit of the public. And to answer your question about matching demand and supply cost effectively, it really boils down to building greater flexibility into our future energy system, upgrading today's centralized generation to match more variable renewables, and finding new ways to leverage customer-owned distributed resources to help meet system level needs. And it's really at the system level that we have to be thinking about. And when I say about thinking about, it's rethinking the way the grid is planned and operated. So when we think of the grid across the ocean, it's a North American grid that is made up of many grids. And it was built over a century. It's rapidly and we're trying to change it in a matter of decades instead of over 100 years. And so we're going much, much faster. So reliably and affordably meeting customers' needs in a cleaner energy future, one with greater dependence on electricity, means dramatically changing how we generate, deliver, and use energy. So that's right in our wheelhouse of research. So to enable this future, innovation is needed at all levels of the energy system planning, development, and operation. Thank you. Turn it back to you.
Thank you. And so very interesting. So another positive message about the approach and the need to look at it from a system and great broad perspective and managing this matching at the system level. So now we're going to move into the practitioner space, I would say, and see how the market is actually already developing, I think, first approach into that space. So maybe starting from the suppliers of electricity and energy with ENGIE. So maybe Thierry, what's your view and what are the next step into these specific aspects?
Yes, thank you, everyone. So I'm Thierry Mathieu. I'm in charge of TO, the Energy Origin, which is an internal startup of ENGIE. I think there is a slide. I don't know if it can be put on the screen. If not, it's not perfect. Thank you. So today I will present this quickly, our solution, which we built with the ambition really to increase and promote green electricity on the grid. How to bring more demand for this, and what we think is that you need more transparency. More transparency on what you consume when you consume green electricity is for us key. It means that if you know what is at stake, then you can manage it. What get measured get managed, and in order to do so, we have built a digital web platform on which the customer, the green electricity consumer, will find some concrete information about his green electricity consumption. And that's something new. And for instance, the consumer will know which renewable asset was injecting in the grid when he was consuming, and that's key. But traceability is important, and transparency, but it comes with trust, and that's why we are leveraging on the blockchain technology. Thanks to this technology, we will be able to create auditable trade. This auditable trail comes with certificate when I was consuming this amount of green electricity, which asset was producing at the same time. To do so, we use a specific blockchain technology, which is consuming low energy, because for most people, when we speak about blockchain, then it's huge consumption of electricity. This is not the case of the technology that we use today. So we started by proposing some daily matching, and we move quickly towards 24/7 zero carbon and electricity consumption. We see a lot of initiative right now around that, with the Energy Tag initiative, for instance, a big consortium, or the 24/7 carbon-free energy compact from the United Nations. ENGIE is part of both of these initiatives, and it will grow quickly in the coming years, as it's really becoming a key aspect of green electricity consumption.
Thank you, Thierry. It's very, very good, very encouraging to see that large actors like ENGIE are really moving the step into that direction with concrete technology implementation. And I think I also heard you got first contract with large users, being data centers already using this methodology as well.
Yes.
So congratulations for this step. I would like to take this opportunity also to highlight to the people listening to us that there is a link on the bottom part of their page, which allows to connect to Slido and be able to raise questions. So please do so, because we want this, as far as possible, this panel to be interactive in the second part. So if you go to the 5.b.4 section of Slido, you will be able to raise your question to the panelists just after this discussion. Now I'm going to switch to another actor, which is obviously very important into this approach, which is the system operator or grid operator, or at the distribution level. So maybe Remy, can you give us a bit of insight how you see this 24/7 approach being developed from your own perspective, and how Enedis is taking these steps forward?
Yeah, thank you, Laurent, and thank you for the invitation. When we talk about decarbonization of the global system, we, in the meantime, ask the question of the key role or the role of the DSOs in the global system. And for us, it will not be a surprise. We strongly believe that the DSOs are the backbone of this energy transition. DSOs like Enedis in France. Why? Because first, we are the one connecting the renewables to the grid. If we look at France, 95% of the renewables are connected directly to the distribution grid. And it's not nothing. It means that we currently have something like 450,000 renewable generation sites directly connected to the distribution grid. It's 27 gigawatts of energy, and it's growing, it's skyrocketing, it's more than 10% per year. So that's why the DSOs are definitely at the cornerstone of the decarbonization of the global system and of the grid, ensuring the distribution of this renewable electricity connected to the grid. And in the meantime, if we look at our perspective for 2030, and 2030 is not is a crucial crossing point in the way up to 2050, which is the carbon neutrality of Europe. By 2030, we expect more than 1 new million of generation sites directly connected to the grid. That's a huge challenge for the DSOs, especially for Enedis. And in the meantime, we have this huge ambition within Enedis to divide by 2 the time, the connection time. So we would like to divide by 2 to be much more faster to connect the renewables to the grid. But when we also talk about this energy transition, we, the DSOs, we have deployed a very important, let's say, tool to enable the energy transition. It's the smart meters. And then in France, companies like Enedis we are not only this historical electricity grid operator, we are also a data operator thanks to the smart meter. The nickname of our smart meter in France is Linky, and there is already more than 30 million smart meters deployed. We expect something like 35 million by the end of the year. It means that 9 customers out of 10 in France are able to use the smart meter, especially the data from the smart meters. With those data, first consumers are able to better understand the way they consume electricity, the way they consume this energy within their house. It means that with a strong, better at least understanding of their behaviors in terms of energy, they will understand how to save electricity, energy. The second point is that using the data coming from the smart meter, coming from the consumer, especially, of course, respecting the privacy, the supplier of electricity are able to tailor-made offers that perfectly fit the need of the consumers. There is already in France a bit more than 20 smart offer, and for sure there is one perfectly fitting what you want, what are your behaviors in terms of electricity consumption. And the last one, which is really innovative, is the self-consumption scheme. Using the smart meter, you are able to act as a self-consumer. It means that if you have solar power on your roof, you will use your own electricity to feed your house. And Linky is able to perfectly measure and monitor how much you consume and how much you produce real time, so you know if you are perfectly matching consumption and generation within your house. It also allows what we call the energy community scheme. It's a kind of self-consumption, but it's a collective self-consumption. You are putting things in common with your neighbors, and Linky helps you to perfectly split the generation and the consumption real time as well. That's really innovative, and we already have something like 100,000 self-consumption consumers sites in France. It's not nothing. So to conclude a bit on this topic, for us, DSOs, energy consumption is about taking control of your consumption. It means perfectly understand how you consume electricity, and then, let's say, find your match within the new offers provided by the suppliers.
Thank you, Remy, and I think congratulations to Enedis for all this work on this smart metering deployment. I must say I'm based in France. I have my Linky in my home, and I'm already calculating my 24/7 carbon analytics out of the Linky data and few data coming from the grid. So definitely this is a very important step to have a smart meter into the home and be able to enable such services. Okay, so I think we went around this first question. What I would conclude is I heard quite some consensus around the table on the interest to move into that direction globally and favor really consumption of electricity from renewable sources 24/7. We heard about technology and ways to bring transparency. We heard about the need to have a good regulatory framework. And we heard a concrete example of a DSO. Us on our side, Decibel, we are currently architecting a new home energy station into the consumer environment, which is combining solar PV, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, and home energy storage. And we have decided actually to sign the energy compact this week towards 24/7, because we believe it is the right metrics to guarantee green electricity down to the end user, and to, of course, kind of avoid sometimes the greenwashing which we see appearing around some energy contract guarantees of origin, which do not really match the real physical supply into the system. Okay, so if we move to the second part of the discussion, it's more related now to the stability of the system, the resiliency of the system. And does this same concept of 24/7 delivery as what we were talking as a way to incentive basically consumption of renewable from the consumer side, also a way to introduce solutions to guarantee electricity distribution at all time, and I would say, generally speaking, maintain the same level of resiliency into our grid as what we've seen historically, which has been very good in Europe, where we see obviously growing concern risks related to climate change and weather extreme events. So maybe I'm going to give the floor back to Pablo and the IEA and hear from him what is his thought from that resilient aspect.
Thank you very much. I was very glad to hear this question right now, because I think that it is essential to notice that the central role that electricity is playing. And today, power interruptions do not mean just having dinner on candlelight, but it means that it will trigger incidents that can be life-threatening, because so many of our system, transport, healthcare, depend on secure access to electricity. And we very recently published an analysis on the topic on a report that you can find for free on our website that is called Power Systems in Transition. And we look precisely at how we can ensure climate and cyber resilience in our power systems. And as part of that, to develop a conceptual framework to describe the concept of climate resilience, which is a concept where we have an idea, but it's not been really formalized yet. In terms of risk, we look at two climate risks. The first one are long-term impacts. When you think about climate change, you think about increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, the sea level rise, and all of these are evolving gradually over time, and they will modify how the power system is run. For example, changes in temperatures that can increase demand due to air conditioning, all the way to the availability of water may change, and that will affect not only hydropower, but also thermal power plants that use water cooling. The other aspect of resilience for climate is actually extreme weather events. And these are the events that provide immediate shocks to the system: cyclones, wildfires, droughts, heat waves, flooding. And unfortunately, this is not a scary future. This is not something that we have to be prepared for in case it happens, because it is happening. And we've seen it recently. We've seen it, for example, in Texas, where the system was disrupted by weather events that are outside of what we were expecting. And in reality, the worst year in 10 is becoming much more common than once in 10 years. And finally, the third aspect is cyber risk. And our power systems have been evolving massively. They're becoming more complex. And digitalization has really allowed us to operate them in a much more efficient manner. It has enabled a new range of services and things like the Linky smart meters, which I have one at home as well. They depend on this. But at the same time, it also expands the risk for cyber attacks. And when you look at these three sources of risk in conjunction, our message is very clear. We need to start incorporating all three dimensions of risk into the planning of energy systems. And when we do this, it's not just looking into the future, because the reality is that all of these risks will affect new technologies, but also affect existing assets that have long lifetimes. And it's this mix of the new and old infrastructure that is very challenging to address. And from that perspective, we need to make sure that the entire system is included in this analysis. And when we do planning, it's not just planning to see how are we going to build our system or how are we going to avoid these issues, but also what is going to be our response when certain events occur, and how can we go to restore the security of the system as quickly as possible while minimizing the impacts that we have. And in this sense, actors like utilities and equipment manufacturers and consumers will play a very important role, but policymakers have a critical one here, because they're the ones that need to ensure that every single stakeholder is included in this process, in the process of assessing the risks, on planning responses, on implementing these plans, and also in evaluating resilience initiatives. Because due to its nature, particularly in the case of cyber resilience, a single weak link can have really system-wide implications. And in the face of this changing world, no measure is permanent. So comprehensive planning, good assessment, and really bringing every single stakeholder to the table to ensure that we have a whole system approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. Very, again, complete response and music to my ear. In my past role, I was implied into working on European risk preparedness approach and others, and we see these systems of systems and these various risks being linked together, and that's obvious. We need to move into that direction and into a system which is becoming very, very complex. Moving back to EPRI and Cathy, maybe we heard a few times Texas in the mouth of Pablo and so on. Maybe US shows the way on how to manage these complex grid situations. What's your view on these particular resiliency aspects?
Oh, sure. Thank you. And I'd say it's music to my ears too when I think of cybersecurity risks. We also we say build it in, design it in, don't bolt it on. But here I'll focus more on the weather aspect that you were speaking to. And for EPRI, ensuring electricity remains clean, affordable, safe, and resilient to consumers is at the heart of our mission. And as we're experiencing this transition in both how electricity is generated and delivered and the climate under which the electricity system operates, we need to understand how the power system of the future may be impacted by the climate and these various risks of the future. So using low carbon resources such as hydrogen, advanced nuclear, and carbon capture utilization and storage can significantly help global net zero emissions. However, the biggest operational challenge to this transition may be the resiliency and reliability of energy supply in the electricity grid. So significant weather events that used to occur once every 100 years are now happening once every 10 years. These events can threaten the safe, reliable, and affordable delivery of electricity and this well-being and safety of our communities. So more frequent climate extremes can lead to power interruptions if the grid is not adequately prepared, and if some of those extremes, like heat waves or cold snaps, drive up electricity demand. We must plan for having adequate energy resources and grid reliability to ensure consumers have an uninterrupted supply of power. Clean energy does no good if it can't be used. The electricity sector needs to be prepared for these inclement weather events. This past spring, EPRI announced a new industry-wide initiative to improve resource adequacy, bringing together grid operators, utilities, researchers, and other key stakeholders to address climate resiliency efforts. We're working with these stakeholders to help them prepare for and incorporate extreme weather considerations into assessment and planning tools, and jointly plan resiliency improvements across communities and the associated energy systems. Additionally, this summer, EPRI also solidified its relationship with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, also known as NERC, to collaboratively enable improved resilience and reliability of the North American electric grid. So using EPRI's outdoor research laboratory in Massachusetts, we're testing ways to improve distribution line responses to weather-related events. Reducing restoration times for weather-related causes of these failures or implementing preventative monitoring can help improve distribution system climate resilience. So in summary, as we decarbonize our electricity sector, we need to work in tandem to ensure the clean energy we're producing remains reliable and affordable for consumers. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, very comprehensive response, and yeah, definitely it's very important to look all these events together in a way, and for sure the weather extreme event has an impact across a variety of elements of the system. So maybe moving now back to Angie and Thierry, if I would ask a bit of a provocative question, is finally this resiliency issue only the problem of the grid operator, or do you feel a supplier like Angie can also bring his own solutions into the debates? How do you see this, Thierry?
That's a very good question, but I think Pablo made the point at the beginning. It's something that will be solved by all the different players, grid operators, utilities like ENGIE, regulators, and potentially also small startups. So it's going to be a global answer. But for what concern utility like ENGIE, we are part of many different innovative projects around these energy communities, batteries projects. And on top of that, and first, we are already impacted how to dispatch our renewable electricity. So that's something we improve every day in our ability to forecast the wind and solar energy, and to be able to react pretty quickly to any change in forecast. And all this know-how is growing on top of the size of the size of fleet of wind and solar energy. So that's a first and important thing. But we are also involved in many projects around e-mobility, which brings also some potential flexibility to the grid if we are able to access to this flexibility. We also have, for instance, a project with the name of FZero, which is in France. The idea is with some solar energy, some batteries, some green hydrogen production, around that to bring many different services. But one of them will be to bring some ancillary services or quick response to change in the grid balance. So in a nutshell, I would say that all the different services that are appearing right now, we are also doing some demand side management with B2C customers, so very small one. That's also something new. So all this move towards more distributed energy by design, if it's also taken all the different risks, cyber attacks and all that should be also taken into account first. But it's also a solution to the resilience of the grid, because you are opening new pockets of flexibility, which before were only centralized pockets. So for ENGIE, it's key to grow all this new service, which are also part of the solution.
Okay, thank you, Thierry. So definitely the supply of services and flexibility to the system is a way of respond to even fast resiliency requirements. Maybe back to, I would say, the central part of the system, so the grid operator, and it is the DSO. So Remy, I'm sure you have a lot to say in view of the complex changing weather pattern also in France. So what's your approach at Enedis on this topic?
Thank you, Laurent. Indeed, when it comes to resiliency, it's a top priority for the DSO. First, let me just remind that during the pandemic, there has been no power disruption and outages. So the lights stayed on during the pandemic. It's definitely a proof of the resiliency of the grid, and we are proud of that. And it's also the opportunity for me to thank all the grid operator and the workforce for Enedis, but for the other European DSO, for the tremendous job they did during the pandemic. When we talk about resiliency or resilience for us, it means first anticipation. We need to anticipate what is going on. Then preparedness. We need to be ready. And then adaptability. As you mentioned, climate change, things are dramatically changing. We need to adapt the way we manage the grid. When it comes and we need that in front of any scenarios, of course, extreme events, but also cybersecurity, same approach, and man-made threats is also something we must keep in mind that's a serious threat for DSOs. When it's come to anticipation, if I take the example of Enedis, we have developed a tool which is a weather monitoring and forecast tool. The name is Jericho, and thanks to Jericho, we are able to have a bit of advance and to know or to anticipate how, for example, a weather event will impact the grid, and then with this small advance, be more prepared to face the difficulties. When it comes to preparedness, we have something that we call the fire task force. Fire task force is 2,000 men and women workforce from Enedis plus 11 logistics platform all over France that we can mobilize them at any time. So if I take an example, if there is something going on, for example, floods or storm in the south part of France, in Nice, for example, we can call these fire task forces, and then people from the other part of France will, as fast as possible, reach the area of Nice with everything we need: trucks, car, of course, people, cables, transformer, to restore the power. And within Enedis, what we would like to do is to say, if there is something really strong going on, a kind of superstorm or floods, we would like to restore the power for 80% of our consumers within 48 hours. So that's our main challenge. And when it comes to adaptability, we need to accept the disruption coming from, for example, climate change. It means that the way we design the grid, we build the grid, we operate the grid will change, and we have to be ready for that. And on this specific point, I would like to highlight the key role of the European Directive on Resilience. It's probably the best way to improve and harmonize the resiliency of the grid all over Europe. It was mentioned previously in the cybersecurity. We, like all the global companies, are witnessing more frequent cyber attack. And on that specific point as well, we must be ready. And there is 3 things or aspects, elements we must preserve. First is the network. We are a grid operator. So the network should remain operational. Lights must stay on, especially during cyber attack. Second one is the data. I mentioned that before. Thanks to the smart meter, we are also a data operator. So we need to protect the data. We need the data to operate the grid. Consumers need the data to better understand their consumption. But we have this responsibility of keeping the data safe, especially if we face a cyber attack. And last but not least is the trust. The continuum of trust is really, really important. Consumers, the global society is trusting us. And much more than before. Thanks to the electrification, consumers trust us to light the home, to heat the home, and also for the mobility with the electrical cars. So this continuum of trust is really, really crucial for us. It means that even if there is something going wrong, trust us, we are doing our best to restore the power, to restore the electricity, and we do our best to keep your data safe. And that's really, really important for us. Being a network operator, as the electrification of usage is going up, and that's for sure the best way to ensure the decarbonization of the global system, means much more responsibility on the TSOs, on the DSOs, and that's why we take the cybersecurity aspects and the cybersecurity threats really seriously. We keep also in mind what we call the man-made treats. You may understand, I will not too much detail what we do on that, but we keep that in mind. That there is those extreme weather events, there is the cybersecurity, and there is also the man-made treats. We take that into account in the way we operate, build, and run the grid.
Thank you, Remy. I think a very comprehensive view on the various aspects which grid operator have to take into account to maintain what I was saying as an introduction. I think the issue is not to improve resiliency anymore, but to really maintain it as what it has been in view, I would say, on external phenomena which are becoming very severe, whether from a weather or a cyber point of view. And maybe my addition to the debate would be to also think a resiliency in terms of impact on architecture. And I think the grid, in a way, will have to become self-healing. We will see a much more electrical vehicle at the edge of the system into the home. So at Decibel, we are very convinced about the vehicle to home becoming a key part of this future development. So in the scenarios of very extreme events and lines being disrupted, and and for people having the chance of a 60 kilowatt hour battery into their backyard, it is a very interesting option to keep your home energy supply for up to 1 or 2 days during the period when the DSO has to make the fixing of the line and so on. So I think beyond the systemic approach, there are also very interesting solutions developing at the edge of the system. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the Slido question. So I'm encouraging the people listening to us to ask questions, continue to ask questions. So among the questions which we have seen, maybe the one is around the example which was shown by Theo is whether it's a good example of what can be done against greenwashing to give customer confidence in the origin of electricity. So Thierry, I suppose you agree with the facts it's a good approach. Maybe you want to comment, but I would be interested to hear from the others whether you feel it should be the way forward in basically providing this confidence on the origin of electricity.
If you want, I can start just to react. Yes, I think we bring a good solution to increase transparency. And really the next step is for regulation and new standard about 24/7 green electricity consumption. Whatever we do, it will come with, for instance, other application like green hydrogen that will need some green electricity produced 24/7. And so the movement is there, and it's really key to have this, and it will help globally to better understand. And you really need to be sure about what you're consuming to avoid any greenwashing around green electricity. And if you know exactly which asset was used to cover your need for a specific hour, then it changes everything. And it will be a start. Of course, potentially you cannot cover all the time, every hour. In February, it's going to be more difficult at the end of the day, of course. But then we are aware of that, and that's something you can work on when you get conscious that, yes, being 100% zero carbon green electricity consuming is not so simple.
Yes, thank you, Thierry. Any other reaction on this particular aspect?
I can jump in and mention that we, as DSOs and within entities, we welcome the idea or the proposition from the Commission in the Fit for 55 package, asking the DSO to provide real-time the information regarding how much renewables are injected into the distribution grid, real-time. It will not be easy for us to provide such a data, but with or thanks to the smart meter, we will do it for sure. But it will also ensure that you cannot or someone cannot sell much more green energy than the one really physically injected into the grid. So it will definitely help. Plus, of course, as mentioned by Thierry, all the additional aspects we could add on the topic. But first, we will provide the data real time on the generation, renewable generation directly injected into the distribution grid.
Thank you, Thierry. Any other reaction? No, so if not, maybe we can switch to another question, which is a bit related to that, is what are the actual and ready to be used instruments for CO2 measurements in real time, what is the desired precision and so on. So here, if I understand well what Theo is doing, you are using basically sensors or smart meters to measure the electricity consumption, and you link this with the origin of this consumption being supplied as an indication or by a supplier of a PPA attached to this consumption point. So my understanding is the measurement is not done with a sensor, but as an indirect calculation. Am I right, or do anyone else wants to respond to that specific point?
I can quickly say how we do that, because we bring the CO2 information about to our customers who will need to know exactly what was, in this case, avoided, because they are not consuming the grid mix. And so it depends from one country to the other. In France, you have RTE, which is providing this information very precisely with exactly the mix, 10 minutes by 10 minutes. You know exactly what is the weight in terms of CO2 of each kilowatt hour. So we use this information to provide this information as aggregated for green electricity consumers to know what was avoided in this case. You have also different other initiatives, more global initiative, like Tomorrow, which is a startup giving access to all the different flows in Europe, and they will also bring some information about CO2 in terms of when it's better to consume, and they will think about in the merit order what is the extra kilowatt hour you will take out or bring to the grid, and in this case you will use the more pollutive aspect of the grid. Okay.
Any other comment, reaction to this question on how to best do the ESC? I think it's a bit technical question. So moving maybe to the resilient part, one question is around whether there is any form of solidarity and cooperation mechanism between DSOs in the event of a major disaster. I think there is a lot of collaboration between DSOs. How do DSOs see this approach?
When there is something really severe hitting the grid somewhere in Europe, of course, there is a strong solidarity among DSOs. If I look at the storm 3 years ago in Ireland, we send our fire task force to Dublin to help our colleagues from ESB networks to rebuild the grid. And no later than this summer, Belgium, Germany were deeply touched by major floods. And we as well helped our Belgium colleagues, providing equipments, providing workforces. So there is this strong solidarity. It's a must. If we, based on the climate change, we do know that it will be probably more and more frequent. That's why we need to have this strong solidarity, and probably to make it or to bring it to a more industrial level. It's definitely part of the directive on resiliency. We work on that. I know that TSOs are doing the same. DSOs will do the same. That's crucial to ensure the continuity, the reliability of the grid.
Thank you. So another question, maybe more to IEA and EPRI in that specific case, and it's more about the modeling and the feasibility of net zero scenarios. Isn't just a wishful thinking? Is the system not going to collapse at some stage, moving towards full net zero? So maybe Pablo or Cathy, if you have your input into this one.
Yeah, I can gladly answer that question. I think it's actually a really important question, particularly in the context today. What does it mean when we say we have a net zero pathway for 2050? Are we looking at something we would like to happen, or is there actually a way there? Like, should we keep some optimism? The truth is, by definition and by the way it was created, it isn't achievable. It's a feasible scenario. And the path to achieve it is not easy. It is a narrow one, but it's still feasible. And I would really urge anybody that is interested to look at the report and see there are, I think, over 400 milestones in terms of what needs to happen from the complete energy system perspective and by when, in order to make sure that our global economy transforms itself from one that is dominated by fossil fuels into one that is powered predominantly by renewable energies. And the issue is that the skillful aspect of this is to ensure that we do not compromise our quality of life. And in that sense, I would really invite people to look at the report, to look at the executive summary, which is not really complicated to read. And you can see that there is a path, and it's not an easy one, that requires clear and ambitious commitments, but it can be done and should be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Pablo, Cathy?
Sure, thanks. So when I think about moving forward, EPRI's, we're working on identifying affordable and reliable carbon reduction pathways, ones that are promising. And a comment that I would have is there's no silver bullet that will get us to global decarbonization and to resilience. It's going to take all available tools, resources, working together throughout the energy sector to meet our goals. And global challenges require global solutions. And in the US, getting a little bit back to the other question about, are we working together? We have a group called the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council that is made up of 30 CEOs that help to represent all the different types of business models in the US. And we have a saying, unity of effort, unity of message. And that way, when we work with our government partners, we are collaborating together. So while we do not have one way to get there, we might have many ways. We can work together to leverage our resources and get there faster, and also have some of that transparency we were talking about, because if we're communicating on a constant basis, then we can help move forward much faster, learn together, do together, and get there together.
Thank you. So maybe I would like to add onto your both element, because I was the Secretary General of ENSOE only 1 year ago, and ENSOE did a lot of work as part of the 10-year network development plan for Europe on analyzing feasible trajectory for net zero, for achieving net zero 2050. And Pablo, you are right, it is feasible. The grid will not collapse. It's a matter of integrating a mix of technology rather than opposing technology against each other. And I think this is from that perspective positive for the mankind and so on. There's still some hope at the end of the journey. Maybe another question which is a bit related to that is, should we sacrifice reliability in order to ensure the green transition? So what is, at the end of the day, behind this question is also what is the right level of cost against this complex resiliency which we need to maintain? What can we afford? Where is the trade-off? Maybe Cathy or Pablo or any other around the table wants to respond.
I can take it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's a very interesting question as well. Very pragmatic, and it highlights that in reality, when we talk about can we achieve such a pathway, or can we be carbon neutral, or can we stop climate change, it is always an implied in a reasonable cost level. You know, of course, we can stop civilization, we can stop our economy, we can stop having any kind of electricity or energy service, but that is not the question. And there's two aspects of this. I think that on one side, all of the pathways that not only the IEA but most institutions investigate have as a precondition to ensure that we maintain our economic development to agreeable levels, that the quality of service and the quality of life of people is maintained, and in a way that is not something we should compromise over. As we said before, services like electricity or energy access, while not a human right, they're one of the biggest enablers for human rights and for quality of life. And almost every aspect of our life depends on it. From a more pragmatic aspect, I think that when you say, can we sacrifice reliability for ensuring this climate transition? My answer would be sacrificing reliability is a very good way for stopping the climate transition. And you can see it in particularly in developing economies. When you have unreliable grids, when you have unreliable electricity supply, what do people do when they can afford it? They buy diesel generators, or they find other alternative energy sources for cooking or heating, like wood or coal pellets. And that means that if we cannot do this transition with the people and while providing high quality and reliable energy, we will not be able to have it at all. And that will be my message.
Okay. Any other reaction to this question?
Sure. That's the beauty of the challenge in front of us for a grid operator. How to improve the sustainability of the system without destroying or making the reliability worse. That's our real challenge. And of course, we will try our best to keep the reliability really high or to improve it. And in the meantime, we will welcome much more renewable into the grid, and we know about the intermittency of those renewables. That's the challenge in front of us. It cannot be done at any cost. That's why we need to be smart. We need to have a smart grid. That's really the definition of a smart grid. It's a grid able to welcome more renewable, intermittent renewable, and to keep the reliability really high. That's why we are working so much, so hard on keeping this reliability, and in the meantime, welcoming new objects like much more renewables, but also electric vehicles. That's definitely part of our challenges. And I mentioned trust before. I ask you to trust us. We are doing our best to keep the reliability, but we will not sacrifice the reliability to improve the sustainability. It cannot be like that. It's socially unacceptable.
And if I may add to that, I would just put some glimmer of hope and say that, you know, in the US, we were able to reduce carbon significantly since 2005 without hurting the GDP. So it can't be done. Although I'll say that we're going to go significantly faster and do a whole lot more, but I think we can figure it out as long as we plan for it. We've got to take the long view while we're working on the short view. And if we do that and working together, I think there's a way.
Thank you, and I think our panel come to its end. If I look at my clock, so I would like to thank all of you. We heard first of all very promising statements We heard a lot about need for more regulation. We heard about a lot of technology ready to be able to be deployed and support this new approach. And I would say it's just a matter of doing it now. And I hope it's going to materialize in the coming years. Anything you want to add, maybe from your own final word perspective? So I think we are done. Thank you to everyone who has listened to us, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did myself. Thanks a lot.